He was a boy who inherited a worthless barn on his 18th birthday. What he discovered inside wasn't just about the past. It was about who he was meant to become. If you've ever been told you're not worth much, or been handed something that felt like an insult, stick around. This story is for you. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in second chances, because that's what this channel is all about. The key was cold. Not just cool to the touch, like metal left on a countertop overnight, but a deep, biting cold that seemed to sink right into my skin. It was an old-fashioned skeleton key, ornate and rusted, the kind you see in movies about haunted houses. Karen, my stepmother, dropped it into my palm with the same indifferent flick of the wrist she used to toss scraps to the dog. Her nails were perfectly manicured, a glossy red that looked like wet paint against my grimy fingers. "Happy birthday, Leo," she said, the words as flat and empty as the hallway behind her. "You're 18 now. A man. David's will said you get this on your 18th birthday." She didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on a point just over my shoulder, as if calculating the square footage I was currently occupying and how quickly it could be vacated. David, my stepfather, had been dead for 2 years. 2 years of me being the leftover problem, the line item in a budget she couldn't wait to erase. 2 years of tiptoeing around her moods, making myself smaller and smaller until I felt like a ghost in my own life. "What is it?" I asked, my voice a croak. I hadn't spoken much that day, or the day before. Silence was a form of armor. "It's a key," she said, stating the obvious with a sigh that suggested I was impossibly slow. "It's to your grandfather's old tool barn, out in Crestfall." "The property is yours. The house was sold off years ago to pay his debts, but the barn and the acre it sits on, that's yours. All yours." The way she said, "all yours," made it sound like a diagnosis, a life sentence. She finally met my eyes, and there was a flicker of something in them. Not pity, maybe satisfaction. The kind of look you give when you've successfully offloaded a broken appliance on someone who doesn't know any better. "The lawyer said it's practically worthless. The land's no good for farming. The structure's probably collapsing. There's an open offer from some development company, a few $1,000s for the whole plot. I'd suggest you take it. It's more than you've got now." She gestured vaguely at the single duffel bag at my feet, which contained everything I owned. A few changes of clothes, a worn paperback, a photo of my mom. That was it. The sum total of Leo Vance. I closed my hand around the key. The sharp edges of the rust dug into my palm. A worthless barn. A final, parting gift that was more of a burden. It was perfectly in keeping with the theme of my life. My mom died when I was 10, a slow fade of sickness that stole her voice first, then her light. David tried, I guess. He married my mom when I was 8, and for 2 years we were almost a family. But after she was gone, he was just a man lost in his own grief, and I was the living reminder of it. He provided a roof and food, but his heart was boarded up. When a heart attack took him suddenly 2 years ago, Karen's flimsy tolerance for me evaporated. I was just another of David's obligations she was now legally saddled with, until the magical date of my 18th birthday. And here it was, Liberation Day. "The bus ticket and $500 are on the table," she said, already turning away. "That's what David set aside for you. It should be enough to get you to Crestfall and tide you over until you sell the land. After that, you're on your own." She didn't say goodbye. She didn't wish me luck. She just walked down the hallway and closed her bedroom door. The click of the lock was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. It was the sound of a life ending. My life, the one I'd known, was officially over. I stood there for a long moment in the silent house, the house that had never felt like a home. I looked at the duffel bag, the key in my hand, the closed door. There was no anger, not yet, just a profound and hollow emptiness. I picked up the envelope from the dining table. Inside was a one-way bus ticket to a town I'd never heard of and 10 crisp $50 bills. I slid the key into my pocket. It felt heavy, like a stone. A worthless barn on a worthless piece of land. It wasn't a fresh start. It was a dead end. But it was the only thing in the world that was mine. I didn't even look back as I pulled the front door shut behind me. The city air was thick with exhaust fumes and the distant wail of a siren. It was a lonely sound, but it was familiar. This new place, Crestfall, was a blank spot on my map, a question mark at the end of a sentence I didn't know how to finish. The weight in my pocket felt less like a stone now and more like an anchor, pulling me down toward a future I couldn't even begin to imagine. I didn't know it then, but Karen was wrong about everything. She was wrong about the barn, wrong about the land, and most of all, she was wrong about me. The key wasn't to a worthless building. It was the key to a story I was meant to finish. The youth shelter was exactly as you'd imagine it. The smell of disinfectant and despair clung to everything. It was a place of last resort, a holding pattern for lives that had stalled out. I got a cot in a room with 7 other guys, most of them older, with eyes that had seen too much and futures that looked too small. I kept to myself, the key a secret, hard lump in my pocket. I spent 2 days there, eating watery stew and trying to make the $500 feel like a fortune instead of the ticking clock it was. On the 3rd day, I got a call, a blocked number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Is this Leo Vance?" a woman's voice asked. It was professional, crisp, with no room for nonsense. "This is Sarah Albright from Albright & Associates. I'm the paralegal handling the final disbursements of David Miller's estate. I'm calling to confirm you received the assets designated for you upon your 18th birthday." Assets. Plural. It was a strange word for a rusty key and a bus ticket. "I got it," I said. "Good," she said, a rustle of papers on her end. "And you're aware of the outstanding offer on the Crestfall property from Stone Creek Development? It's for $4,500. Frankly, Mr. Vance, given the county assessment, it's a generous offer. The land is zoned as non-arable, and the structure is listed as dilapidated. It's a liability more than an asset. My advice, for what it's worth, is to take the offer. I can have the paperwork sent to you wherever you are. You sign, we file, and the money is wired to an account for you." She made it sound so simple. A clean break. $4,500. To me, right then, sleeping on a lumpy cot and rationing my 1050s, it sounded like $1 million. It was a getaway car. It was a first month's rent on a real apartment. It was a chance to not be here, in this place where hope came to die. "Why do they want it?" I asked, the question popping out before I could stop it. There was a slight pause. "Developers buy up cheap rural parcels all the time, Mr. Vance. They assemble them, wait for zoning changes, and then build. It's a long-term strategy. Your little acre is probably just one small piece of a much larger puzzle for them. It has no special value on its own." Her tone was matter-of-fact, but something about it felt too rehearsed, too smooth. Or maybe I was just looking for suspicion where there was none. Maybe a worthless piece of land was just a worthless piece of land. "So, shall I prepare the documents?" she pressed. I could picture her in a sterile office, surrounded by beige filing cabinets, my entire future reduced to a single manila folder on her desk. The name on the tab? Vance, Leo. File and forget. "No," I said, and the word surprised me as much as it probably surprised her. "I want to see it first." Another pause. Longer this time. I heard a faint sigh. "As you wish. The bus ticket gets you to Crestfall. The property is about 2 miles out of town on Ridge Road. You can't miss it. Let me know when you've made a decision." The line went dead. I stood there, the cheap phone feeling slick in my hand. Why had I said no? Every rational part of my brain was screaming that I was an idiot. Take the money. Run. Don't go to some forgotten town to look at a pile of rotting wood. But the key in my pocket felt a little warmer now. It was a connection to a grandfather I'd never known. My mom had talked about him sometimes. Her father, a man named Thomas. She'd said he was quiet and smart and that he could fix anything. She'd always get a sad look in her eyes when she mentioned him, a story unfinished. He died before she did, and I never got to meet him. This barn, this land, it was his. It was the only piece of him, of my mother's family, that I had left. Going there felt less like a choice and more like a pilgrimage. A stupid, impractical pilgrimage to a place that probably wasn't worth the bus fare. But I had to know. I had to see for myself what a worthless inheritance looked like. That night, I slept with my duffel bag as a pillow and my hand in my pocket, wrapped around the key. The next morning, I was on a bus heading east, away from the only city I'd ever known, toward a place called Crestfall. The bus ride was a slow, rattling journey from gray to green. The concrete maze of the city gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to patched-together farmland and dense stretches of forest. The air coming through the cracked window started to smell different, less like gasoline and hot pavement, more like damp earth and pine needles. With every mile, I felt like I was traveling not just across the state, but back in time. The other passengers were mostly older folks, their faces etched with the kind of quiet endurance you see in people who have lived their whole lives in one place. They got on and off at small towns with names like Harmony Creek and Pine Ridge, places that were little more than a post office, a general store, and a church. I watched the landscape unspool, feeling a strange mix of terror and anticipation. I was a ghost, haunting my own life, floating toward an unknown destination. There was no one to call, no one waiting for me. I was utterly, completely alone. And yet, the key in my pocket felt like a promise. A stupid, rusty, probably meaningless promise. Crestfall wasn't so much a town as a place where the road got tired and decided to rest for a minute. A single main street was lined with brick buildings, their facades faded from a century of sun and snow. A diner with a buzzing neon sign, a hardware store, a small grocery, a boarded-up movie theater. That was it. The bus hissed to a stop in front of the diner, its brakes groaning in protest. "Crestfall," the driver announced to the empty bus. I was the only one left. I grabbed my duffel bag and stepped out into the late afternoon sun. The silence was the first thing I noticed. It was a thick, heavy silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant caw of a crow. After a lifetime in the city, the quiet was deafening. It felt like the world was holding its breath. I asked the woman behind the counter in the diner for directions to Ridge Road. She was in her 60s, with kind eyes and a network of fine lines around her mouth. She looked at me, then at my bag, and seemed to take in my entire situation in a single, sympathetic glance. "Ridge Road? That's a ways out. You walkin'?" I nodded. She pointed a thumb out the window. "Head that way, past the church. When the pavement ends, you're on Ridge Road. Not much out there anymore, just the old Vance place, I suppose." Her eyes lingered on me. "You family?" "His grandson," I said. A flicker of recognition. "Thomas's grandson. My goodness, you've got your mother's eyes." I didn't know what to say to that. No one had mentioned my mother in years. "He was a good man, your grandfather," she added softly. "Quiet, kept to himself, but a good man." She poured me a glass of water without me asking. "It's a hot walk. You be careful." The small kindness felt monumental. It was a crack of light in the gray numbness I'd been living in. I thanked her and headed out. The walk was longer than I expected. The pavement did end, turning into a gravel road that kicked up dust with every step. The sun beat down, and the silence of the town was replaced by the sound of the wilderness, the buzz of insects, the rustle of unseen things in the tall grass. It was beautiful and intimidating all at once. After about 40 minutes, I saw it. Set back from the road, half swallowed by overgrown trees and tangled vines, was a large, dilapidated barn. Its red paint was almost entirely peeled away, leaving weathered gray wood that looked like old bones. The roof sagged in the middle, and one of the large doors hung crookedly on its hinges. It looked abandoned, forgotten, a relic of a time long past. It looked worthless. My heart sank. Karen was right. The lawyer was right. This was a mistake. A long, hot, stupid mistake. I almost turned around right there. I could walk back to town, call Miss Albright, and tell her to drop the papers, take the $4,000 and disappear. But I'd come this far. I had to see it through. I pushed my way through the thorny bushes and tall weeds that guarded the entrance. The air was thick with the smell of decay and wild mint. As I got closer, I saw the main doors were chained and padlocked, but the lock was new, a heavy-duty brass thing. My rusty skeleton key wasn't for this. Then I saw a smaller, man-sized door set into the side of the building. It was nearly hidden by ivy, but it was there. And it had a keyhole, an old, iron-plated keyhole, dark with rust. My key. My heart started to beat a little faster. I pulled it from my pocket. It felt warm now, charged with a strange energy. I slid it into the lock. It was a stiff, reluctant fit. I had to jiggle it, push it, whisper a half-forgotten prayer. For a second, I thought it was hopeless. Then, with a loud, grating clunk, the lock turned. The sound echoed in the quiet afternoon. I took a deep breath, pulled the handle, and the heavy door creaked open into darkness. The air that rushed out to meet me was cool and musty, thick with the scent of sawdust, old oil, and time itself. It smelled like history. I stepped inside, my eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. Shafts of dusty sunlight pierced the darkness through gaps in the wooden walls, illuminating a cavernous space filled with ghosts. Not literal ghosts, but the ghosts of work, of purpose. A massive workbench ran along one entire wall, littered with tools arranged with a strange, meticulous order. Wrenches, hammers, and saws hung from pegs, their outlines traced in the dust, showing where each one belonged. A massive, silent engine block hung from a chain hoist in the center of the room, like a steel heart that had long stopped beating. Shelves overflowed with jars of bolts, nuts, and screws, all neatly labeled in a faded, spidery handwriting. This wasn't a junk pile. This was a sanctuary, a place where things were understood, taken apart, and made whole again. My grandfather, Thomas Vance, had been more than just a mechanic. He'd been an artist, and this was his studio. I ran my hand along the surface of the workbench. It was made of a single, massive piece of timber, worn smooth and dark with decades of use. There were nicks and gouges, dark oil stains, and faint circular marks where coffee cups had been set down. It was a map of a man's life, a life of labor and creation. I felt a connection to him in that moment, a man I'd never met. He had stood here, in this exact spot. His hands had touched these tools. He had breathed this same dusty air. For the first time since my mom died, I didn't feel completely adrift. I felt anchored. I spent the next hour just exploring, moving through the cathedral of forgotten work. In the back corner, almost hidden behind a stack of old tires, was a small, sectioned-off area. It looked like a tiny office. There was a simple wooden desk, a straight-backed chair, and a single bare bulb hanging from a cord. And on the desk, a heavy, dark green military-style footlocker. It was closed with two thick hasps, each secured with a small, sturdy padlock. My heart leaped. This was something different. The tools were part of the workshop, but this was set apart. This was personal. I tugged on the locks. They were solid. I searched the desk drawers, but they were empty except for some dried-up pens and a few rusty paper clips. There were no keys. A wave of frustration washed over me. I had come all this way, I had found this place that felt like a beginning, and now I was stopped by 2 cheap padlocks. I looked around the workbench, my eyes scanning the rows of tools. My gaze fell on a heavy crowbar. It felt wrong to break something in this place that was so ordered, so respected. But I had to know what was inside. It took 2 sharp, jarring cracks of metal on metal, but the hasps gave way. The sound was violent in the sacred quiet of the barn. I lifted the heavy lid of the footlocker. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Money? Old photographs? More tools? What I found was paper. Stacks and stacks of paper, bundled neatly with twine. And on top of the first bundle, a single, sealed envelope with my name on it. Leo. Just Leo. Written in that same, spidery handwriting from the jars. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. This was it. This was the reason I was here. This was the start of the real story. I sat down in the dusty wooden chair, the envelope feeling impossibly heavy in my hands. The air in the small office was still and close. The only sound was the frantic beating of my own heart. I carefully tore open the seal. Inside were several pages, filled with that same precise, slightly slanted script. I unfolded them and began to read. Leo, it began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a man. I am sorry for that. I am sorry for all the years between us, for all the silence. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive an old man for his choices, even if you can't understand them. I need you to understand them. That is why I am writing this. It is the only way I know how. The words felt like a direct line to the past, a voice calling out from across a vast, empty space. I could almost hear him, a quiet, steady voice in the silence of the barn. Your mother, Eleanor, was the best part of me. She was light and laughter, and she saw the world not for what it was, but for what it could be. When she left this town, she was running toward a bigger life, and I was proud of her. When she met your father, and then later David, all I ever wanted was for her to be happy, and for a time, she was. When you were born, she sent me a picture. You were so small, a tiny thing with a shock of dark hair. She told me you had my eyes. I kept that picture on this very desk. It's still here, in this locker. My most valuable possession. My own eyes started to burn. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep reading. When she got sick, she asked me not to come. She didn't want me to see her like that. She wanted me to remember her strong and vibrant. It was the hardest thing I ever did, honoring that wish. After she passed, I wanted to come for you. More than anything in this world, I wanted to storm into that city and bring you home. But I couldn't. And this is the part that will be hard to hear, Leo. I need you to listen closely. I stayed away to protect you. Protect me? From what? The words made no sense. He had abandoned me. David had been a stranger, and Karen had been a warden. I had been alone. This land, this barn, it's more than just an acre of dirt. Our family has been here for generations. We never had much, but we had this. About 15 years ago, a company called Stone Creek Development started buying up land around here. They were quiet about it, using different corporate names, paying cash, making it seem like a series of unrelated sales. They told everyone they were planning a retirement community. But I knew something was wrong. They were too aggressive, too secretive. Your great-grandfather was a well digger, a water witcher they called him. He taught me how to read the land, to understand what was happening beneath the surface. And I knew, Leo, I knew what they were really after. He went on to explain, in meticulous detail, the geology of the area. He wrote about the underground aquifer, one of the purest and largest in the state, that ran directly beneath his property. The barn, he explained, was situated almost directly over the primary access point. Stone Creek Development didn't want the land for houses. They wanted it for the water. They planned to build a massive bottling plant, drain the aquifer, and sell the water back to the drought-stricken cities in the west. It would destroy the local ecosystem, dry up the wells of every farm for 100 miles, and turn Crestfall into a ghost town. But it would make them billions. I found out, he wrote. I put the pieces together. I hired a geologist with what little money I had, and he confirmed it. I took my findings to the county, to the state. They didn't listen. Stone Creek had lawyers, lobbyists, they had money. I was just a crazy old mechanic in a tool barn. They started to threaten me, quietly at first, then not so quietly. They made it clear that they would do whatever it took to get this land. They tried to have it seized for back taxes I didn't owe. They tried to have me declared incompetent. They made my life a living hell. This was all happening right around the time your mother died. If I had brought you here, Leo, you would have been a target. You would have been leverage. They would have used you against me. I couldn't let that happen. Leaving you where you were, anonymous and safe in the city with David, was the only way I could protect you while I fought them. It broke my heart every single day, but I did it for you. This whole fight, it was always for you. I had to stop reading. The pages were trembling in my hands. I put my head in my hands and I finally broke. The grief and anger and loneliness of the past 8 years came pouring out of me in a torrent of silent, ragged sobs. I cried for my mom. I cried for the grandfather I never knew. I cried for the scared, lonely kid I had been. And I cried for the man I was now, sitting in a dusty barn, with the weight of a legacy I never knew existed settling onto my shoulders. He hadn't abandoned me. He had shielded me. His silence wasn't indifference. It was a fortress. The worthless barn wasn't a joke. It was a battleground. And the fight wasn't over. It's a funny thing, isn't it? How a story can change. 1 minute, you're the victim, the abandoned kid, the forgotten footnote. The next, you're something else entirely. You're a son, a grandson, a soldier in a war you didn't know you were born into. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where everything you thought you knew about your life, about your past, was turned completely upside down. Where you found out a story of neglect was actually a story of protection. If you have, I want you to let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Because this community, right here, it's for people like us. People who have had to rewrite their own stories. And if you're new here, if this is hitting home for you, consider subscribing. You're not alone in this. Now, back to the barn. After the tears stopped, a strange calm settled over me. It was the calm that comes after a storm has passed, leaving the air clean and the world new. The grief was still there, a dull ache in my chest. But it was joined by something else now. Purpose. I looked around the barn, at the tools hanging so neatly on the walls. They weren't just for fixing engines anymore, they were weapons. And the footlocker wasn't a grave, it was an armory. I spent the rest of the day going through the other bundles of paper. It was all there. Copies of the geological surveys, correspondence with state environmental agencies, all of them form letters of dismissal. Detailed logs of harassment from Stone Creek's agents, affidavits from neighbors they had bullied into selling. My grandfather had been building a case, brick by painful brick. He was a meticulous record keeper, a quiet warrior who fought with evidence and truth. But he had run out of time. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden fingers of light through the cracks in the walls, I found the last bundle. It was different from the others. It contained old family photos, a picture of my mother as a little girl with a gap-toothed smile, the photo of me as a baby that he'd mentioned. And underneath it all, one last letter. This one was shorter. Leo, it read, if you found this, you know the truth. You now have a choice. Ms. Albright, the paralegal, is a good person, but she doesn't know any of this. To her, this is just a worthless piece of land, and selling it is the logical thing to do. The offer from Stone Creek is still on the table. $4,500. You can take that money. No one would blame you. You can walk away from this fight, from this town, and start a new life. You owe this place nothing. You owe me nothing. That is your first choice. The easy choice. He was right. I could take the money. I could be on a bus tomorrow, headed anywhere. I could get a small apartment, a steady job. I could be normal. Or, the letter continued, you can choose the second path. You can stay. You can fight. In this footlocker is every piece of evidence I gathered. But it's not enough. The key is in the workshop itself, where the heart of the work lies. That's all I can tell you. If you choose this path, know that it will be hard. They will come for you, just as they came for me. But you are not alone. There are good people in this town, people who remember what Stone Creek did. And you have the truth on your side. The choice is yours, son. Whatever you decide, know that I am proud of you. Know that I loved you. The letter ended there. The choice is yours. For my entire life, choices had been made for me. By sickness, by death, by grief, by the state. Now, for the first time, I had a real choice. A choice between an easy escape and a hard fight. Between forgetting the past and honoring it. I stood up and walked out of the small office, back into the main part of the barn. The last rays of sunlight were hitting the massive engine block hanging from the hoist. The heart of the work. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. I walked over to it, my heart pounding. It was a huge, greasy V8 engine, the kind you'd find in an old muscle car. It was cold and silent. I ran my hands over it, feeling the solid, unyielding steel. What could he have hidden here? It seemed impossible. I spent the next hour examining it from every angle, tapping on the casing, looking for a loose bolt, a hidden seam. Nothing. I was about to give up, convinced I had misunderstood, when my fingers brushed against the oil pan at the very bottom. One of the bolts felt different. It wasn't as tight as the others. I found a wrench on the workbench that fit, my hands slick with sweat and grime. I gave it a turn. It moved. I turned it again and again until it came free in my hand. Then I tried the one next to it. It was also loose. One by one, I removed all 10 bolts holding the oil pan in place. With the last one gone, I gently pried the heavy steel pan away from the bottom of the engine block. It wasn't full of oil. It was empty, and inside the dark, hollow cavity, wrapped in an oil-stained cloth, was a small, flat metal box. It was a safe deposit box, and taped to the top of it was a key. Not an old, rusty key like the one to the barn, but a small, modern, numbered key. I pulled out the box. It was heavier than it looked. I used the key and opened it. Inside, nestled in foam, was a digital audio recorder, a stack of small cassette tapes, and a single, folded piece of paper. It was a signed, notarized confession from a former Stone Creek geologist, a man who had been fired for refusing to falsify his reports. It detailed, date by date, the company's conspiracy to illegally acquire the water rights by burying the environmental data. The tapes were his recordings of the meetings where he was threatened by their executives. This was it. This was the smoking gun. This was the truth my grandfather had died to protect. Holding that box, I knew there was no choice left to make. Or rather, The choice had already been made. I wasn't the kind of person who could walk away from this. My grandfather hadn't raised me, but he had just taught me the most important lesson of my life. Some things are worth fighting for. Home, family, truth. I wasn't just Leo Vance, the kid who aged out of the system. I was Thomas Vance's grandson, and this was my fight now. The next morning, I walked back into Crestfall. The town looked different now. It wasn't just a collection of old buildings, it was a place worth saving. I went straight to the diner. The same woman was behind the counter. She smiled when she saw me. "You're back. Figured you would be. Find what you were looking for out there?" "More than I ever expected," I said. "Is there a payphone around here?" She pointed to the corner. I had Ms. Albright's number memorized. I dialed it, my knuckles white as I held the receiver. When she answered, her voice was the same, bored, professional monotone. "Albright and Associates." "Miss Albright, it's Leo Vance," I said. "Mr. Vance, have you come to a decision about the Stone Creek offer?" "I have," I said, and my voice was steady, clearer than it had ever been. "I'm rejecting the offer, and I'm hiring you to represent me in a lawsuit against them." There was a long, dead silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear her blinking, trying to process what I'd just said. "Excuse me? Mr. Vance, on what grounds? You're an 18-year-old boy with no assets besides a piece of land they want to buy. They have a legal team that could bury you in paperwork before you even file." "I have evidence," I said simply. "I have proof that Stone Creek Development has been engaged in a multi-year conspiracy to defraud the citizens of this county and illegally appropriate state water resources. I have geological reports they suppressed, and I have a sworn affidavit and recorded testimony from one of their former employees." The silence stretched on. When she finally spoke, the boredom was gone. Her voice was sharp, focused, and laced with a new and unfamiliar tone. Respect. "Mr. Vance," she said slowly, "where are you right now?" "I'm in Crestfall," I said, "at my grandfather's barn." "Don't go anywhere," she said. "Don't talk to anyone. I'm getting in my car. I'll be there in 3 hours." Those 3 hours were the longest of my life. I went back to the barn, my fortress, my inheritance. I sat at the workbench and laid out the evidence. The confession, the tapes, my grandfather's meticulous notes. It was the story of a quiet man's heroic stand against a faceless corporation. When Ms. Albright's car, a sensible gray sedan, pulled up the gravel road, she found me there, waiting. She was younger than I'd pictured, maybe in her early 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that took in everything at once. The dilapidated barn, the organized chaos of the workbench, the evidence laid out like a battle plan, and me. I probably looked like a mess, covered in dust and engine grease, a kid playing at being a man. But she didn't look at me like a kid. She looked at me like a client. She spent the next 2 hours in that barn, reading every document, listening to every tape, her expression growing more grim and more determined with each passing minute. When she was finally done, she looked up at me, her eyes blazing with a fire I hadn't seen before. "They're not just going to lose, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice low and furious. "We are going to burn them to the ground." That was the beginning of the war. The first shot was a cease and desist letter we sent to Stone Creek, along with a notice of intent to sue. Their response was swift. A team of lawyers in expensive suits showed up in Crestfall. They tried to intimidate me, first with offers, then with threats. They offered me $50,000, then $100. When I refused, they sent a man to the barn one evening. He didn't introduce himself. He just told me I was a stupid kid playing a game I couldn't win, and that accidents happen all the time out in the country. I didn't back down. I had spent my whole life being scared. I was done with it. I told him to get off my property. The barn wasn't just a building anymore. It was my home. I'd moved a cot into the small office, cleaned it out, and ran an extension cord from a neighbor's generator. I was living there, breathing the same air my grandfather had, surrounded by his legacy. I started cleaning the place up, not to change it, but to restore it. I swept away the thickest layers of dust, organized the tools, and repaired the leaking roof with shingles I bought at the town hardware store. The people in town started to notice. The woman at the diner, whose name was Martha, started giving me free coffee and pie. The owner of the hardware store, a gruff old man named Hank, gave me a discount and told me my grandfather had been one of his best customers. He said Thomas Vance was a man of his word and that if I was anything like him, I was all right. Small kindnesses, quiet words of encouragement. They were the people my grandfather had been fighting for. They were my people now. Ms. Albright, who insisted I call her Sarah, was a force of nature. She filed the lawsuit and held a press conference on the steps of the county courthouse. The story got picked up by a regional newspaper, then a statewide news channel. The story of the orphan boy taking on the corporate giant from his grandfather's old tool barn was too good to pass up. Stone Creek's stock price took a hit. The state's attorney general's office opened an investigation. The fortress of lies my grandfather had spent years chipping away at was finally starting to crumble. The legal battle dragged on for months. There were depositions, hearings, and endless streams of paperwork. Stone Creek's lawyers tried to paint my grandfather as a delusional old crank and me as a greedy, opportunistic kid. But the evidence was undeniable. The confession from the geologist, backed up by the tapes, was irrefutable. My grandfather's own meticulous notes showed a clear pattern of harassment and conspiracy. Sarah was brilliant, tearing their arguments apart with cold, hard facts. Throughout it all, I lived at the barn. I learned to fix the old generator. I learned how the tools felt in my hands. I learned the rhythms of the land around me. I wasn't just defending a piece of property. I was defending my home. I was earning my inheritance. Finally, the day before the trial was set to begin, Stone Creek folded. They offered a settlement. It wasn't just for me, it was a multi-million-dollar fund for the town of Crestfall, to compensate for the depressed property values and economic damage their scheme had caused. They agreed to a permanent injunction, surrendering all mineral and water rights in the county. And they made a separate, private settlement with me. It was more money than I could have ever imagined. But it wasn't about the money. Not anymore. It was about the truth. It was about justice for a quiet man who died fighting for what was right. A few months after the settlement, I was standing in the barn. It was clean now, the windows repaired, the floor swept. The tools gleamed on the walls. It was no longer a forgotten relic. It was alive, a place of potential. Sarah was there with me, leaning against the workbench. "So," she said, a small smile on her face. "What's next for Leo Vance? You could go anywhere, do anything. College? Travel the world?" I looked around the big, open space. I thought about the city, about the shelter, about the feeling of being invisible. I thought about the quiet satisfaction of fixing a leaky roof, the smell of sawdust, the solid weight of a hammer in my hand. "I think I'll stay here," I said. "My grandfather was good at fixing things. I think I'd like to be too." I was going to reopen the barn, not as a full-time mechanic shop, but as a place where people could come to learn. A community workshop. A place to teach kids who felt lost, like I had, how to build something real with their own two hands. A place to fix what was broken. The inheritance wasn't the land or the barn or the money from the settlement. The real inheritance was the choice my grandfather gave me. The choice to fight for something bigger than myself. The tools on the walls were part of it, but the most important tools he left me were the ones you couldn't see. Courage, integrity, and the knowledge that a home isn't just a place you own. It's a place you protect, a place you build, a place you earn. He had saved me, not by giving me a fortune, but by giving me a purpose. He showed me that my life, a life I thought was worthless, had value after all. So that's my story. The story of how a worthless tool barn saved my life. It taught me that the things we inherit aren't always what they seem. Sometimes the most valuable gifts are the ones that come with a burden, the ones that ask something of us. They're the ones that force us to become the person we were always meant to be. This journey started with me being kicked out, with nothing but a key and a name on a deed. But it ended with me finding a home, a community, and a true understanding of my own worth. It turns out my stepmother was right about one thing. I was on my own. But she was wrong about what that meant. It didn't mean I was alone. It meant I was free to choose my own path, to fight my own battles, and to build my own future, right here, in a place that had been waiting for me all along. If you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for listening. This story is about finding value where others see none, and about the legacies that truly matter. If this resonated with you, if you've ever felt written off or had to fight for your own place in the world, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. But more than that, I want you to share a piece of your story in the comments below. What's the most unexpected inheritance you've ever received? It doesn't have to be money or property. It could be a piece of advice, a lesson learned the hard way, a second chance you didn't see coming. Let's fill this space with stories of resilience and hope. Because every one of our stories matters. Every one of us has a legacy to build. And sometimes, it all starts with a rusty old key and a place to call home.